Welcome to the Connected Campus podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
Hello, everybody. We are here with episode number 20 of the Connected Campus podcast. Super excited to have another esteemed higher up in the IT world and higher education. We love having CIOs and sort of people in that sort of suite of positions with their sort of vantage point on their campus and sort of the field at large of, digital transformation, higher education, the things that are happening right now. So super excited for our guest, somebody that I've been connected to for a while, to kind of revisit and sort of look at sort of this very interesting moment we're in for higher education. So we'll have you, Joe, introduce yourself quickly, kind of just go over your title and your role, and then get into the rest of our conversation.
Right. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion today. As you said, we've connected for many years. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I told you about this, but one of my students was actually inspired by you. So he was kind of, geeked out. I think one of your podcasts before, he was really geeked out and said, I know Dustin. And so I think he might have connected with you many years ago. So yeah. So I know you've touched a lot of people here, and thank you for this conversation, especially during this timely discussion during ChatGPT, which is another one of those technology that's causing some disruptions in higher education. So it's good to reflect on where we are and where we've been in higher education, especially the last 30 years or so. With the web and other consumerization of IT topics. So thank you.
Because I know like your role and like how I sort of got connected with you at first, like you've sort of moved up in your organization through, I think, kind of an initial focus on like student information systems and technology supporting a student experience. So like sort of that professional background, I guess I'd be curious sort of to hear you kind of talk about it now, sort of over like a span of time of sort of like that initial sort of point in your journey where I sort of like met you and have been sort of like following along on like social media and everything, but like sort of I don't know, sort of how you've sort of navigated your career, over the last several years, going from there to now being at sort of, the deputy CIO level, like such a sort of wider vantage point for the entire institution, sort of that sort of, that whole journey, I guess. Just talk about that for a little bit.
Yep. No, I think, I can tell you my role right now. So I'm the deputy CIO at UC Santa Barbara. As you mentioned, I spent most of my time in the student success, student affairs area, IT. And so my current role, and I'll go over that. In my current role, in that role, I provide strategic direction for a unit within the central IT unit, and I oversee a team of application developers, business analysts, enterprise architects, and a team of business intelligence and data services group. Um, I also oversee the campus financial systems, student information systems, electronic medical record systems, which were very, very critical to during the COVID time, and of course the whole time. Um, Enterprise data services, which is again directly or indirectly used by the entire university, as we moved over from data just servers like just silo data and not necessarily just used in the past to now becoming an integral component of a connected university. And I have more than 150 applications in my portfolio. So currently, we have major projects that I'm leading or being part of. Modernization of our financial management system is one. We're in the process of selecting a data platform, campus data platform. So while through the years we've had many big data warehouses, we have many reporting systems on campus. We're starting to embark, and we've done this for many years, but we're restarting this process of getting this one, data source, data repository, just the central data campus platform system for the campus to use. And also the other thing that I'm really excited leading is this campus IT professionals mentorship program. And again, that's as Dustin, as you said, you've been following me, but I think one of the things that you've known about me is my commitment to leadership and DEI. And so that's one of the projects that I'm really excited to lead because it does set us up to, build leaders who maybe typically been marginalized, or maybe to leaders that can represent the population that we serve. So, and in that role, I transitioned to that maybe a couple of years ago in my current role. And prior to that, I was the head of the student affairs IT, unit on campus. And so we integrated that group with the central IT campus. And for I think that was a great move for scale for value, making sure that as a university we're functioning as one. I was in that role. I think I grew up in student affairs since 1996, so I've kind of grown up in that environment. And before that, I was a student at UCSB. And a lot of the mindset that I have today is driven by my experience as a first generation, Filipino American, someone who is from a low socioeconomic background, and someone who at times have felt marginalized or feel like I haven't been part of the system. And so, as a mindset of a leader, I kind of look at that experience, and my volunteer roles that I play on campus and nationally to drive the decisions that I make as an IT leader on campus and at times nationally as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's awesome just seeing all the sort of things that you're involved with and have done, which we'll try to cover and talk about as many of them as we can, because I think that it's just so valuable. Like that lens and perspective and that sort of that grounding or sort of empathy that you have of like one your own experience as a student, which like certainly like things have changed over the past like couple of decades and stuff, but like it's almost like that doesn't matter as much as just sort of that like that heart, that sort of like empathy, that sort of like remembering sort of the feelings, because like sometimes it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter if it's like in person, online, the tools, the technology, maybe the buildings change and all these sort of things. It's just sort of like, what did it feel like to like not understand how just these complex systems of higher education work, and how can we sort of understand and have a lot of sort of empathy and understanding towards the student experience, sort of inform these sort of technology decisions and sort of processes and everything. So it's just like really refreshing to me, and always just I think you stood out to me as one of the people out there that's just very like very committed to this sort of stuff. So I think I wanted to kind of give a moment to that too, of like for all the years that you've worked in this space, what are some of the things that you've seen that are sort of the most salient of like how things have changed in terms of certainly like you mentioned like chat gpt and AI is probably like the hot
Yeah.
button one now, but like there's always like something. So I'm curious just sort of with that like longer term point of view back, like some of the things that you feel like were really sort of impactful changes that have happened over the years.
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, before I go into that, one of the principles that I think one of my mentors, had said to me, and it's kind of driven the way that you work, is this idea of, she's our vice chancellor for student affairs, Dr. Klawoon, says, Joe, as a leader, one of the best things that you can bring, in your work and in your conversation with the leaders at the university is your one-on-one conversation with your students. And I've always carried that with me. So, I typically would have lunch with students maybe once or twice a week. I would just walk around campus to see what they do. I'd walk around the library. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, I was playing before the pandemic, I was playing Pokemon, with students, and she saw me playing, and she said, "You know what? I'm glad you're doing that because you get to see, the paths that students go through. Otherwise, you won't be able to see those." So I've always viewed my role as an IT leader from that lens and throughout my career. So, I started my career in 1996 at UCSB. And it's in a way, and before that, maybe a couple of years before that, I started doing web development. And in some ways, it's the evolution of technology at UCSB is kind of has a parallel with my career, right? So I started out as a web developer. I think the first one in the Division of Student Affairs. And back then, I remember people saying, and I see this now with ChatGPT, by the way, and I think with social media and mobile. I remember like introducing web and people saying, "Joe, why do we need the web for? We have brochures, right?" Then mobile came about, and people say, "Why do we need mobile for? We have desktop. No way that we'll be using mobile." As a matter of fact, I had colleagues to say, "No way we're ever going to put financial aid data on the web." Because they don't see like the changing landscape of the consumerization of IT, like cloud, mobile, social media. I saw the same thing with social media, and then now I'm seeing the same thing with ChatGPT. And so throughout my career, I've seen those evolve. But ultimately, the way I view my work in terms of just the way it's changed is look at who we serve and look who we work with. So, from the outside, you can look at this model called the pestle, and I think many of your audience would be familiar with that. It's looking at the politics, looking at economics, looking at the socioeconomic and social and technology That's kind of driving. That's legal. And so throughout the years, that's kind of been driving how technology evolved on campus. In part, as someone that would need to respond to that. In some cases, to enable that. In some cases, act as a driver, right, to those changes. Um, the other principle that I've seen, I know I think we're getting close to that, is the idea of meeting where the students are. And what I mean by that is not just physically, but where are they emotionally? Where are they, in terms of life cycle? And part of that is, how do we provide the services as well? Not necessarily on premise, but as you see with the pandemic, we've had to provide the services remotely, and now we're doing it hybrid. So I think looking back at the 30th history, I've seen the introduction of technology like internet and web and cloud, social media, those kind of things that's kind of
Mhm.
driven our changes. Additionally, is how have our population and their demands and needs have changed as well, and how do I have respond to that as well? There are like for example, COVID. It's I saw a meme one day saying like COVID is the driver of digital transformation, and it was right because we forced us to be ready for that. And fortunately for us, we had a very future forward thinking CIO who introduced Zoom and other technologies that enable us to be ready for that time of COVID. So for me personally, in my previous role in student affairs IT, we were able to pivot. We were able to provide the VPN, the remote access, you know, um, for our students and for workers, their staff, employees, in probably about a week. And there's about 1,000 people, employees.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's always incredible just hearing because I think the narrative of the pandemic in higher ed was so much of this sort of like mad scramble, big disruptions and everything. But it's like, yeah, like, there was sort of a slow drip of this sort of digital transformation that was happening. And maybe it was just sort of in these sort of pockets on campus, but there were certain institutions that, like, you know, unfortunately, I guess we're in sort of the minority of like, yeah, we kind of did our homework ahead of time. We were sort of following the trend line and really sort of implementing things. And it was sort of an easier pivot and not so disruptive. And I think what I've also been keeping an eye on is sort of over the past year of like how many institutions were like, oh yeah, I mean, we did that because we had to, but we're not going to do it anymore. Like
Right,
that's silly or whatever, like, and the ones who are sort of keeping with it and really embodying sort of that like hybrid reality where like you said, it that's certainly what students are demanding in terms of like how they'd like to engage in their learning, where it's either like, I'll maybe take some courses online, some in person, or at least like my courses are very much augmented through a lot of sort of tools that can sort of just amplify the learning that's happening, in the content through like an LMS and everything. And then just like the just greater accessibility and flexibility of like what are the services that we're providing and then how are we delivering them, of like, okay, just seeing that there's only just continued demand for mental health services, like how can we try to deliver them in a way that's more accessible and flexible and kind of dynamic and everything. So like just yeah, all of those changes where it's like, history repeats itself or like what's old is new again or whatever. There's always something that people are like scratching their heads about. I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I don't know, maybe. Which, yeah, always in hindsight, it seems silly of like, oh, of course, the web and social media
right,
and,
right.
mobile apps and everything. But at the time, it's hard. But I think it's almost trying to like remember and take that lesson for this moment to at least be like open-minded of just sort of like, okay, like let's, you know, kind of look under the hood or kick the tires, whatever sort of, thing, versus like I think there are people that are just sort of immediately dismissive of new things. So it's interesting to kind of hear your perspective on this. And I'm curious to sort of like kind of a wrinkle to all of this, because even just when you're talking about the like the roles and things that you oversee in your position, and knowing that you several years ago like got your MBA, and just how sort of how you speak about like, employee engagement and retention and mentorship and just like the purview of your position. I'm just like, that like refreshingly sounds very sophisticated, of like business analysts and all these sort of things. So like, how have you leveraged those sort of learning opportunities and maybe the conferences and stuff, and I know you kind of get out and about at, uh how have you leveraged those to kind of stay current in your work or sort of inform your perspective about sort of the things that you're doing at UC Santa Barbara?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. You mentioned something that's important for me, which is the mentorship and the roles that I've played in providing the leadership to people. And at the heart of what we do are people. We have this philosophy in my organizations of mission driven people always. Mission driven people always. And I don't say people first because unfortunately there are some situations where out of my control where people are I can't say people first. When you let people go, or just things that just happen to some control. I can't say, oh, people first. No, that's why I would say people always, because part of it is just always considering how people are impacted and how the role that they play in the decision making process. So that's what I do. But with respect to my learning, as you know, I'm an autodidact. I think there's a term that I learned many years ago. So I've always been a learner, and I've always believed that as a leader, you have to be, at the forefront of everything. And maybe one of the lessons that was imparted on me by a former colleague and actually a mentor was, Joe, start looking at 2 or 3 years ahead. And admittedly, as you see with ChatGPT, it's hard to predict what's coming up, right? But always looking forward to what's on our path. For example, I remember when I started introducing web and started introducing social media and mobile. In some cases, I was seen as a pariah. Joe, there is no place for social media in higher education. As a matter of fact, we're going to block Twitter. We're going to block Facebook. And, all open jokes around me to say, Joe, God, man, you shouldn't be thinking about that. Right. Same thing with mobile. It's like, that's going to expose us to cybersecurity, which is a valid concern. But I've always been in the forefront of technology and just the way we do things, but always grounded in the idea again: who benefits from this technology, who are harmed by this technology, and how do we go about doing that? And along the way, how do we make sure that the folks involved, my staff, people above me, my peers, also are also part of that journey. So not just me just charging along on my own, because we do need everyone to play their role. And it's almost exciting to come together as a team, go together as a team, and see the fruit of your work, not as an individual, but as a team.
Yeah, and I think like uh something else is sort of swirling in my mind because it sort of plays off kind of the learning opportunities is like, I think I think institutions like, in classically higher education, these institutions have maybe been around for, hundreds of years, like almost like that idea of like the ivory tower is this sort of like it's like a in a vacuum or sort of like, offset from almost like reality of the rest of the world. But I think we're seeing where like higher ed is, it's very much a part of the communities that they exist in, sort of the town and gown of it all, of like taking that sort of in this context in the conversation is the idea of like sort of the tools and the platforms and sort of practices that have certainly become the norm in sort of like the business world and whatever else. It's like, well, how can we adapt those into this space, and like how can we, yeah, like social media, AI, like whatever it is, there's certainly a prudent discourse of thinking about security and these different things and implementing it in a thoughtful way and making sure that it's yeah, benefiting students, faculty, staff, whoever it kind of involves. But uh yeah, like there's just like an influence that can happen, and I think maintain kind of a relevancy of uh higher education institutions and just how they run and how they make decisions and just like the tools that they use and everything. And you can uh keep a good pulse on that by sort of exposing yourself and you know creating kind of that team culture of bringing in people with diverse backgrounds and perspectives and interests, and kind of nurturing those too, of like uh you know, whether it is like you getting an MBA or somebody on your team, has a particular interest in cybersecurity or something else. It's like, yeah, like we want to try to have like a, array of expertise or sort of involvements or sort of backgrounds and stuff. And yeah, just like everybody benefits from just being able to sort of bring, sort of a modernity and sort of efficiency and sort of effectiveness of all these sort of modern tools, whether it is,
Right. And I think
AI or
part of the
whatever
reason why
else.
I also do the things I do in terms of learning is I want to model that. I remember that to my staff and to my students. I remember many years ago, I'm part of the NASPA undergraduate fellowship program. I'm a mentor. I've been a mentor for many years. And I remember telling them, it's like, you might want to check out, getting masters or PhDs. and I realized I had a BA, right? And again, there's nothing bad about that. I love my career, and but for myself, if I'm telling my story to my students that, and maybe I should try it out myself. So I did get my MBA in about 1990, 2016, 2014, 2016. I was working full time, but I think it was one of the, in addition to learning, it's also a way for me to hold myself accountable with the things that I tell my students and tell my staff. So, you know, don't wait for people to provide you with the opportunity. Go learn, go outside. There's just so many different opportunities to learn. I go on LinkedIn, social media, Twitter, everywhere, and there's a lot of online courses right there. But the best thing that I've been able to do is connect with people like you, connect with people who are, thinking differently outside the box or having the wisdom, the mentors to say, Joe, this is a bigger perspective, and this is how, just historically, this is how it's been. They're not telling me to do it the same way, but it does matter to put, things in perspective historically, right? So one of the concepts that I tell my students and my staff is this idea of sociological imagination, and the idea that in the continuum of time, we exist at that, at a certain period of that, and things that happened before us, things that will happen after us. And so I tell them ask them this question sometimes, like, what's the significance of the role that you play with respect to the past, the present, and the future? It helps me think. I was reading a book the other day. Actually, I came across an article that says, I think Plato, Socrates, also at some point rejected writing, right? The printing press that was rejected. Uh, so just being open to possibilities. I think that's the best way to learn. I think one of the worst things that we can do is just kind of bury our heads in the sand and say, "Oh, that's not going to happen." We've always done it this way. There's no way that we're going to do that. This is bad, or this is. On the other hand, we cannot be so, you know, uh, maximizers either, right? ChatGPT is the best thing that's ever happened, and so we should we should change everything for ChatGPT. So it's this balance of again, examining, being nimble about, your ideas. And frankly, the best thing you can do is try it yourself. How does that work? And then share your experience and have conversation around that. And of course, have to go talk with people who may have different ideas about ChatGPT or other technology. That's how we're going to come together as one and move forward.
Well, and yeah, like even just for what you're saying, like it's just like starting somewhere because it could be like a LinkedIn learning course, which
Yeah.
like, is fairly uh sort of quick hit in terms of like learning relative to like getting into a but even just like you're saying, like just like talking with people or like playing around on a sandbox of like, a particular tool or doing something where it's like all of that is just sort of keeping that perspective and sort of, you know, uh engaging with people on social media, like sort of people who are, you know, kind of starting conversations or sharing resources and all that. It's like it's all sort of it all counts. I get like that's sort of where my mind is going, and I think an interesting anecdote you shared there of like because I wanted to at least just sort of give like one more quick moment on sort of the all the sort of volunteer things that you do of like with the NASPA undergraduate fellows and sort of that being sort of a moment of inspiration, like this volunteer thing that you did, sort of like kind of maybe just sort of nudging you towards the direction of like, furthering your own education in a more sort of substantive and sort of formal way, in addition to continuing, all the sort of like anecdotal and sort of conversations and things that you're doing and other kind of, digital education things and everything. Um, but I just found it like also just refreshing that you do that and just like, for anybody who like checks out your LinkedIn, like I feel like you've got a lot of cool like volunteer things that you do. And I think just that obviously just kind of jives with what you've sort of said of just sort of like immersing yourself as sort of keeping an open mind and being very sort of uh sort of wanting to kind of keep that very like close connection to students, what they're sort of thinking about and doing and all those sort of things. So I guess just speaking to that of sort of you know obviously they're volunteer, they're not things that you have to do, like you are choosing to give your time to those things. So like why is that a choice that you've made? Like why is that important? Like what is that, what have those volunteer experiences given to you over the years?
I think as much as I'm able to impart my knowledge, to other folks and to be able to benefit them, I benefit as much as I think those that I serve or I work with. Um, one of the stories that I tell, with students is my story of overcoming my speech impediments or public, the fear of public speaking that paralyzed me for most of my life. Yeah, as a young kid, I was bullied because of my, quote, fresh off the boat accent as an immigrant, making, and that really kind of affected my young life. And I've used that kind of suffering and experience to tell my students, this is a someone that you could also be, a possibility model. But in the process, as I do public speaking, I teach public speaking, I've also gained the confidence. I've also gained the, like the ability to be a better communicator, right? And so, I think it's a mutual benefit to me and to the people that I work with. And certainly, as I said earlier, Vice Chancellor Clowoon told me that the one-on-one conversations are one of the best assets that we have. That really matters. But some of the things I do, and I think I really wholeheartedly, believe in this, that I hope that more administrators, do get a chance to experience and have this close connection with students, seeing them at their lowest, unfortunately, but then also seeing them succeed. And so one of the beauty of my job as a mentor at UC Santa Barbara is I get to see students come to the university, right, during like their summer program before they even get to UCSB, and I see them mature, and I see their struggles, I see their triumphs along the way, right? So and I see them graduate. So I've been privileged enough to be the first, like a keynote speaker for first generation graduation for the Filipino graduate program, ceremony. And so it's been fun to be able to see students at their lowest and their highest because it humanizes the experience. And really, when I'm talking about the impact of IT, if I'm asked a question, what's the impact you've done, in your role, Joe? I can look at it in terms of numbers. Certainly other ERP systems, information systems, counseling and psychological program systems. That's the kind of build. It is in terms of numbers, it's a lot, right? The applications, but in addition to that, I look at those moments where I've been able to impact students, at their lowest, or I've been with them when at their highest, and to be able to tell their parents when I meet them on campus to say, I've been working with students, and you probably don't know this about them, but please be proud of them, and because sometimes they don't know what their students do, and to be part of that experience has been really one of the things that drive me, and there's a reason why, you know, at one point a well-meaning colleague says, Joe, you have to choose. Are you an IT professional? Or are you a student affairs professional? I said, I can't do that. I get what they're saying, which is like, from a professional role, yes, I get that, right? But as a mindset, I can't just separate myself, from that mindset of I am a student success advocate. I'm a person who would like to believe that I have a positive impact on the people around me, not just students, but the well-meaning staff, the researchers and faculty. So that's why when people say, Joe, you're an IT professional. Like, actually, I'm more than that. And yes, my formal role is that, but the bigger picture here is how do I become of value, to other human beings, not just in my role. Sometimes people pigeonhole me into that, but I would like to believe that, my roles are bigger than that. My purpose is bigger than that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a really powerful. I appreciate you sharing that part of your story and just sort of the clear sort of emotion and sort of passion of like, these sort of involvements that you have, that it's like really important to kind of have that as like an anchor, and like that it obviously, yeah, like gives you so much. And I've certainly experienced sort of similar in my own way of like, creating content with in like writing myself or talking to people. Like it just helps to sort of crystallize ideas and connect dots, and sort of just make things really tangible. And just obviously like I learned as much from doing all these like interviews, I think, as anybody else. And so yeah, like I think those are just, a part of just even broadly the sort of like learning experiences and things that you're doing is like volunteering to be a mentor as much as like taking a course. Like it's all sort of feeding into helping you do your work as a, because yeah, like like your title can only be like what it is or however long it is or whatever, but that like you are a like, CIO at an higher institution. Like it's like those are two important sort of contexts that you work within. And yeah, so I think it's like important to kind of kind of keep grounding yourself and sort of like, okay, like let's not kind of get, you know, too one way or the other, because even that like idea of people always, it's like yes, like we want to be human with each other and have that empathy, have that sort of patience and understanding and open-mindedness, but it's like, you kind of have to like sometimes lean the other way where it's like the technology just can't do that, or we
Right.
can't have it do that, or we can't, like, there's just like limitations or bounds to things sometimes. So yeah, it's all just really interesting perspectives, and I'm always very appreciative of sort of your the lens that you kind of take to everything. So we will wrap up though our episode here with the question that we ask everybody, and I'll be very curious, as always, I think, with all of our esteemed and interesting guests, to hear your perspective on this, of what does a connected campus look and or feel like to you?
I think you can look at that in different perspectives. Obviously you can look at it from a physical lens, right? So how does the experience physically on campus? How connected are they? Does it make sense to people? If you're to, if you have a visitor on campus, right? Say, Joe, can you tell me, how do I get from here to there? You should be able to easily just say that, right, from there. Digitally, of course, I think in terms of the experience, how can they easily navigate that? Um, from all the life cycles, from before they apply to college, to the university, all the way to when they graduate. But I think most importantly is a sense of belonging and a sense of community. And I think I go back to the question you posed earlier: why do I volunteer so much, and why do I involve myself beyond IT? Is because I want to be able to build a network where a student says, by the way, they call me Tito Joe here, Uncle Joe for some of the students. That's kind of role I've played as well. This, Uncle Joe, Tito Joe, I'm having an issue with getting some money because of my, something happened, and for me to be able to just call on my colleagues who I've developed relationships for many many years overnight, and and the next day someone's on it. To me, that's the sense of connection. That's a connected campus, right? So from the operation perspective, from a learning perspective, I think the friction should be as small as possible. You can't avoid friction in the experience. I think it's good, but I think for me, it's a sense of community, it's a sense of belonging, it's a sense that your intention, your purpose, from when you started all the way to when you succeed. There's a clear path to that, or at least there's a path to that. So more than anything else, a connected campus is about the experience, it's about the feeling.
Yeah, and I like that. Yeah, like that's like kind of like I always like. I'm curious how people take the question, because yeah, it's either very like personal or maybe sort of like very technical, but that like that core that I think is really just sort of the through line for this episode of like community and relationships and sort of being kind of people centered, uh, can create those opportunities for like removing friction and all that. Where it's just like, hey, like if somebody like reaches out to help,
Sure.
you're like, great, all right, let's see what we can do. I'm gonna work with that person that I know and trust and can rely on and those sort of things. And like it's just a very interesting sort of way to sort of almost just like simplify very complex large systems, is just sort of like those relationships that like you are approachable, you are accessible, and that you have also nurtured a relationship with your colleagues to be able to sort of like you know get working on a problem together, whether it is just helping that one individual with something, or something larger scale. So but yeah, like that community almost being sort of the action, like sort of the energy, the thing that you are striving towards to create that outcome of uh trying to reduce friction as much as possible, and just having things work sort of better together. So
Yeah.
uh yeah, so very much appreciate your time, your perspectives, and we'll have ways to connect with you in the description, show notes for this episode. But yeah, just thank you so much for taking the time and sharing all that you did and doing the great work that you do, and everything else. So yeah,
Yeah.
just really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dustin. And before I leave, I think I want to just share a couple of things that I think, goes to the idea of what you do. And, I think more than ever, this connection that we're creating here, as we go more technology wise and tech digital, I think how do we get to the point where human are always in the middle, human centered, digital experience. And the other thing that I want to impart as well is like sometimes people look at technology as this or that, and the way I look at it is how does technology complement the work that we do? So making things more efficient so that we can spend more time building this kind of relationships and building those times where you have that one-on-one conversation with a student who, has a extra hardship, or have extra finance challenges. So instead of like, just creating this transactional over and over, things that can be automated and not be able to spend time with the students, how do we use technology so that we can complement the work that we do so that you can spend more time with the people, not sitting in front of like this machines, just entering data.
Yeah, and I think I'll definitely give you some credit here. I feel like I've always had that uh sort of mission or sort of value set very much ingrained in my brain. I feel like you're one of the first people many years ago that sort of heard using that sort of vernacular, like high tech, high touch and everything. Like, and I just feel like that's thankfully very much in sort of the ether of this sort of digital transformation moment. But I feel like it's a very good sort of final thoughts, parting words, sort of call to action to everybody is like, you know, yeah, like keeping that mindset at the core of sort of your decision making around, again, whatever it is. Like if it's deciding on a tool, a process or whatever else, like, how can we leverage leverage this technology to empower better sort of support of students and each other and all that, like having it be very the solution and the outcome be very human centered and because I think that'll always just be a good guiding North Star for folks to have. So yes, I encourage everybody to sort of noodle on that, marinade, meditate, whatever it is. And just thanks again, Joe, so much for hanging out, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you, Dustin. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to the Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Connected Campus.